Hi guys, it's me, Arden Lee. I am back with another video. And in today's video, we're going to talk about how do you overcome the fears and triggers around getting your own needs met when you have been conditioned or even conditioned yourself throughout your life to believe that having your own needs met is selfish. If you are someone who consistently prioritizes the needs and desires of other people above yourself, even if you know that this is a pattern that you want to break, how do you actually do it, right? This is one of those things that the most helpful way for me to think about it has been to kind of take these conclusions to their logical end, right? If we continue to do these things, where is it going to get us, right? If we continue to, because patterns, many patterns, as they ingrain in us over time, they're not just consistent and linear, they can also be exponential, right? The more we affirm a belief to ourselves, the more we act in ways that support that belief, the stronger the belief grows. The more evidence we accumulate that the belief is true, and the more and more we keep doing it. So understanding that this belief taken to its logical end is not going to be healthy is often a way for us to actually get over ourselves and actually disrupt the pattern. I know that for me, for example, being desensitized and feeling like I had to cultivate toughness, right? That I had to be tough, that I had to endure. When I realized that the logical end of that pattern was going to be my death one way or another, I was like, how much danger and recklessness am I going to expose myself to before one day I die, right? I was doing parkour without health insurance. So, I mean, I was doing it on a spring-loaded gymnastics floor, but, like, again, if I kept going down that road, what was it going to take? So, understanding that our continuing to prioritize the needs of other people above our own, first of all, we know it's not healthy for us, right? We know that we have needs, and if we continue in this behavior, despite the fact that it might feel uncomfortable, it might feel selfish at first to prioritize ourselves, that's natural, right? We will overcome that feeling. we will slowly acclimate ourselves to the fact that everything and everyone around us is better and healthier when we're also taking care of ourselves, right? We'll get there, but it's natural for that to feel selfish at first. Not only, sorry you guys, I made a bunch of videos today and I'm like losing my train of thought. So not only is it in our own best interest to see that those needs are met, but we have to start thinking about the fact that constantly prioritizing other people's needs isn't good for them either. I'm going to say that again. Constantly prioritizing other people's needs is not good for them either. I'm going to give you an extreme example. I'm going to give you a high stakes example, and then I'm going to give you the low stakes example that was written in the comments where the request for this video topic was made. A high stakes example, for example, is I used to identify as submissive, right? I was super into the BDSM scene, and it was like 24/7 power exchange, just like I have no needs and my dominant gets to have all the needs, right? Well, ultimately what that led to was extremely bad decisions in his judgment that I followed along with despite my better impulses. And that led to me bailing him out of jail for $25,000. And it really would have been better for me, obviously, to have walked away, and he's still paying me back. But also, I start to look back and I start to think, what, it would have been better for him too. If I had actually said, what, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I voiced my dissent, I've voiced my opinion that the way that he was choosing to do things was foolish. But I didn't put my money where my mouth was. I was basically like, well, I've said my piece and you know how I feel about it. And later when I picked him up from fucking jail, I had a moment of I told you so, but what good was that really if I was still complicit, if I was still going along with it? By prioritizing someone else and their own judgment and their own needs, quote unquote, over myself and my sense of safety. I actually was creating an environment where I was enabling him. And maybe what he needed in that moment was for a woman to stand up and walk away and say, no, what you're doing is dangerous. And I don't care. I will absolutely walk out on 3 years of a relationship if it gets the point home to you that this is not okay, and I really don't approve of this. What point was there in me saying, by the way, I don't think what you're doing is smart, and I think that you should stop, and I think that you should be more cautious, if I wasn't willing to back that up with my actions? And I wasn't able to do that at the time. I'm not going to beat myself up for it, but I am going to critically examine it, especially if it helps me to not distrust my intuition and deprioritize my needs so severely in the future. Nobody was served in that situation. So that's a high stakes example, right? And that's less about like someone's everyday needs and preferences and more about the fact that this person was running a business that skirted legality, and landed in jail for it. So let's take the lower stakes example that this person gave in their comment. And they said that there were a couple different kinds of croissants that they had bought the day before. And there were some guests, and she and another guest ate the remainders of one type of croissant. And when someone else came downstairs, they said that they had wanted the other type of croissant that was gone, so they had to settle for the other kind, right? And this person felt so much guilt around that incident that they really couldn't shake. Like, oh my God, how did I not read this person's mind and know that they wanted that croissant, and that I shouldn't have eaten it because now I ate the croissant that they wanted, and that means that they don't get what they really wanted, and I feel bad about that. Okay, so that's a lower stake example, but honestly, it's maybe even better. It's maybe even more prescient as we can really unpack the sort of cumulative impact of these little decisions, right? So people need to learn that if there's something that they want or need, then they need to speak up about it before it's too late. I believe that in this, if I'm remembering this excerpt correctly, I believe this person actually had bought all the croissants themselves. So the only reason that the person even had croissants to begin with is that they went out and bought them, right? So there's that to consider. But if we continue to enable people in forcing us to be mind readers about what it is that they want. Down. Sorry, Edgar's being bad again. Edgar. That's right. Sorry, he has not yet learned which surfaces are acceptable for him to go on and which ones are not. That's better. You can sit on the chair. Okay, so if we continue to enable people in expecting us to be mind readers about what their desires are, how are we setting them up for success in the rest of the world? People need to learn that if they want a certain kind of meal, then they need to make that request beforehand. People need to learn that the rest of the world is not going to cater to them. I know I sound like a 1950s dad right now, but when you're talking about something that extreme, where you're feeling this extreme guilt over the fact that you didn't read their mind to know which croissant they wanted ahead of time and you ate it instead, well, how is that person going to navigate the rest of the world expecting that everyone is going to give them the level of attentiveness that you are, right? to that point, people need to be held accountable to being their own best selves and also taking care of their needs and speaking up for themselves and communicating. So, a better option is just to do exactly what you did. And, if they didn't wake up in time to get the croissant that they wanted, either they could have said, hey, I would really want, the ham and cheese croissant tomorrow. Or, hey, could we get some extras? Or they could have even put an order in, before whatever. You're not obligated to read people's minds. And setting up the expectation for someone that people will read their minds is actually harmful to them. So that's a mind fuck, huh? Right? um, it promotes relationships where communication isn't happening and needs aren't being spoken up about. It promotes relationships where there is an expectation that one person's needs don't matter, and that's not healthy for anyone. That's not healthy even for the person whose needs are being centered in the relationship, because it's not a healthy relationship template for them to experience. They ideally um, need to be exposed to the kind of experience of communication and talking about our needs and boundaries that is present in healthy relationships, right? So it's not just even about us and our needs, although of course our needs are important, but we have to remember that we're also setting an example for other people. And something that really hit home for me when I was on my own process of healing and repatterning was that I suddenly realized, I was like, the logical end of all of my toxic relationships with men were that they were completely incapable of taking care of themselves, and I was doing everything. And there was something actually kind of insidious and malevolent about that, because I was so terrified of abandonment that unconsciously I was meeting so many of their needs so that they would not be able to function without me. And after that relationship, finally, after roughly 4.5 years of that relationship with the person who I bailed out of jail, when I finally kicked him out of my house because he turned physically abusive, and I finally had enough, he didn't have a place to stay. He violated a building code of a workspace that he rented and operated in. So he technically, it was his. There was no boss he was getting in trouble with. It was his and his business partners. But there was a building code that was like, there needs to, you need to put the metal gate down outside, and there needs to like not be people in the building when the metal gate is down or whatever. So it was a workspace. It was a commercial space. This is what he told me anyway. And there weren't supposed to be people sleeping inside it at night, and that was the only place that he had to stay. So he was technically violating a building code when I kicked him out, because he had nowhere else to go. And at the time, I had to really prioritize myself, because also it's like, well, if you're literally gonna be physically abusive to me, then you don't have a right to stay in my house. You didn't have a right to stay in my house in the first place. But at that point, I really had to prioritize my safety. But if I had prioritized my health and safety long before that, maybe I wouldn't have let him move in with me when he lost everything. Maybe I would have had a better exit plan for that. Or maybe if I hadn't constantly been babying the fuck out of him, he would have had other people in his life who were sources of support that he could have leaned on. And instead, he had nothing left. So again, that's not something you really need to worry about if it's just someone deciding which croissant they want for breakfast. But if we keep doing this pattern, if the low stakes turn into higher and higher and higher stakes, which we've seen can happen, because the more we reinforce a belief, the more it shows up in our lives, and the more the belief gets reinforced, right? It's a vicious cycle. We talk about that in week 2 of the Repatterning Project. By the way, if you're watching this and you're thinking about joining us, shoot me a PM. I would love to hop on a call with you and figure out if it's a good step. So that is something that we talk about, the fact that these beliefs get, our patterns, they don't just stay the same. They tend to, in most cases that I recognize, they tend to actually amplify over time, because we keep doing them. And the more we do them, the more they reinforce, and the more they ingrain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So taken to their logical conclusion, if we are constantly monitoring other people's needs and prioritizing them above our own, we're going to end up actually creating these relationships where they're completely dependent on us, and they're not going to know how to function in the world without us. And that's not healthy, right? They're not going to know that other people have needs too. We're going to enable them in being an asshole, right? Because we're enabling them in not considering other people's needs. And we're enabling them in not communicating their needs, not being upfront, not getting their own needs taken care of by their own damn selves, right? it's up to us to take care of our own needs, to buy our own croissants, or at least communicate what we need to other people. It's nice to be taken care of by others once in a while, especially if it is a house guest situation. I've definitely gotten better at relaxing and receiving and not being in people's homes like I'm a political refugee of some sort. But it's nice to be taken care of, but that's got to be reciprocal. So bottom line is, understand that when you are prioritizing other people's needs over your own to an extent that is unhealthy, you are also enabling the other person in unhealthy behavior. And I don't say this to guilt anyone, especially not the wonderful person who wrote this comment and asked for this video, but I say this because for me, this was the big shock that it took for me to actually realize the harm that I was doing in this pattern. That actually what it really means to meet someone's needs is, and to meet my needs, is to understand that actually what we have a need for is a healthy relationship or a healthy friendship. And that if someone is doing something that is outside that, if we are enabling someone in doing something that is outside that, that's actually not serving them. We have to bring ourselves to a place where we are serving in a higher capacity. So thank you guys for listening. Edgar, you are so bad. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.